Religion has been one of the most impactful thing on humans, one of the most relevant in the past few millennia. Um, Religion, in a sense, tackles certain fundamental questions such as how reality came about, um, why there is existence, what existence is, etc. I believe more than half of the population is religious of some kind. There are many different religions. However, they are all unified by certain core concepts which they are trying to discuss and cover. In recent years, there's been a greater rise of atheism where there isn't really a belief in God. Um, However, even still with atheists, there is still a certain faith-based system, and really a lot of the faith is placed into modern science instead of belief in religious entities um, or deities. And also in more recent times, even spirituality has been becoming a lot more popular. And what unifies all these things, as I said, with religion is, but it goes the same with religion, science, and spirituality, is it's all essentially a quest to seek the truth and answer some of the most deepest questions, which is essentially what my channel is based around. I've made many videos in the past trying my best to explain certain of these topics using my own direct experience. To do so. And yeah, essentially I thought of a format of how I want to explain in one video and cover all the topics in one. It's going to be quite difficult because such a vast topic. It's difficult to explain all in one video, but I'm going to try my best. And yeah, the format which I want to use is the 5 W's as well as how. So who, what, when, where, how, and why. Right? So for example, who created reality? What is reality? Where is reality? When, why, how, etc., etc. Since all questions, in a sense, have these 6 roots, whatever question you're asking, it's always either what is a thing, or why is it happening, or how is it happening. It's always from these 5 or 6 root questions. So that's what I'm going to try and use to explain this. If you have always been philosophical, you enjoy pondering such deep topics, then this video is for you. So yeah, let me begin. Essentially, if you've watched some of my past videos, you'll know that I'd say the most accurate way of describing what reality is, who it is, where it is, when it is, why it is really all nothing in particular. So you can't really say, if, for example, the question, what is reality? You can't really answer that question accurately, because there isn't anything in particular that reality is. It has no particular qualities. And it goes the same for where. There's no particular place that reality is occurring. There's no particular reason. So, for example, why? That's a big question that a lot of people ponder. I myself have done a lot in the past. You might ask yourself, why is this happening to me or to this country or to the world, so on and so forth. But really, these questions can't really be answered, because to answer these questions, for example, why is this happening? The reason would have to be something in particular. There would have to be a particular reason. But in essence, reality is a lot more general than specific at the highest level. And I'm going to try and explain this as I progress. So let me just read kind of what I've written down. So the most accurate answer is no who in particular, no what in particular, no where, no when, no why, no how, while simultaneously / therefore being something, somewhere, sometime, for some reason, in a particular manner. Right? This might sound like I'm just saying words, might sound like those words don't mean anything, right? The reason why I say that, as I said, it's really no thing in particular. Let's just take one of the questions, like what is it? What is reality? When I say it's no thing in particular, when I say it's nothing, this is why I prefer to use the word nothingness in some of my past videos, is when I'm saying it's nothing in particular, I'm not really saying that it's just outright nothing, because it is something, but it's just not anything in particular, meaning that it's all things. So what is reality? Really is everything. That's what reality is. It's not anything in particular, therefore it is every single thing that it could be. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? See, for example, this mug, as I've used in Chelsea mug. Yeah, I haven't even been watching football for a long time, but I've had this mug for a while. Chelsea mug. See, this Chelsea mug. It only exists as what it is because it's not a Manchester United mug. It's not a Liverpool mug. It's not an Arsenal mug. It's not a glass of water. It's not a remote controller. See, what everything is defined by everything that it isn't. See, because everything can only be one thing at a time. So there are no objects that are two things at once. Every single thing that exists is one thing at a time, right? And it's defined by its unique qualities. See, like this mug has unique qualities. It has a unique shape, a unique color, a unique weight. There's no other mug in the world like this. You may say there's multiple mugs like this, right? And yes, there are many mugs which are the same type as this. Now, I'm sure there's someone else in the world who has a mug that looks exactly the same, but it's not the same mug. You see? And this is really the essence of non-duality, is when you realize that there's only one of everything, and everything is simply itself. It can't be defined, because reality is undefined at its highest level. But essentially, everything is defined by its unique qualities. That's what existence really is its uniqueness. Even if you had, for example, twins, they may be identical twins, but they're not the same person. They're two different people in two different places, etc., etc. So that's why I said really the most accurate way to say it is that it's no who, no what, no where, no when, no why, no how. And for example, no how, the reason, see, because all of this fuss about religion, science, spirituality, is all trying to almost explain how and why reality came to be, how creation happened, what creation is. But that assumes that reality is something in particular. That assumes that there is a reason why reality is real. That assumes that there is a certain mechanism through which reality was created, when actually there isn't, because reality was always real. And that's why its essence is eternity or infinity or nothingness. See, because you can't really create nothing, you can only create something. Right? And everything that is something in particular. That's what I want you to understand. Whereas reality at the highest level has no particular qualities. That's why it could never have been created. Right? And it's outside of time and space. So only within time. For example, this mug was created by humans. Within time, there was a process because it's within time, right? But the highest level of reality transcends time and space, so there cannot be a process because all processes are within time. All right. So, but I want to go a bit deeper. As I said, that's in a sense the most accurate way of describing it. I have to again put a little caveat of the limitations of language. So everything I say is not going to be completely accurate because language is limited, and therefore you cannot accurately describe something infinite or unlimited using a limited device such as language, right? However, I'm going to try my best, and I'm also going to try and describe what reality is using these 5 or 6 questions in a way where the dualistic mind will still be able to understand it. Because as I've said in some of my past videos, the absolute nature of reality, since it's absolute in its nature, the mind cannot possibly grasp it or understand it because the mind needs context to understand any content, right? And this requires duality, polarity, opposition, in be able to use the contrast between two objects to understand what one of the objects is, right? If there was only ever one object, you wouldn't be able to understand it because there's nothing else that you could compare it against. It's the same with currencies. For example, if you look at the forex exchange market or stocks or any kind of currency, every currency is always being measured against other currencies like the USD JPY or GBP USD or Bitcoin USD or Bitcoin GBP. See, because every single currency, you can only really understand what a currency's value is compared to another currency. You see, you can only ever call someone tall if you're comparing them to other people who are shorter than them. See, so this is essentially the relative nature of this dualistic plane. There's no absolutes within the relative plane, right? So let me try and explain this. I'll kind of read what I've written down. Let's see. So, who is the one experiencing reality? To this, I would say the self. The self is experiencing reality. And when I say the self, I'm not speaking about any individual self, any like individual human. Like, I'm not speaking about like myself or yourself. I'm speaking about the absolute self or the universal self. So this is in a sense the I that we all refer to. We usually as humans think when you say myself or I did this, you usually think of that in a manner as if when you say I did this and then you did that. you think of those as two separate things. You think I and you are like opposites, and the I that that other person over there refers to is a separate I, right? But what I'm speaking about is the absolute I, the absolute self, which is the only self there is, the universal self, which is in a sense experiencing all experiences all at once, simultaneously. So it's the only conscious entity experiencing anything. There's only one consciousness, and that is in a sense the self, which is experiencing everything. And the self has no qualities in particular. It doesn't have a form, it's formless. The only thing you can say about the self is that it is itself. That's it. And yes, when I start describing a lot of these qualities of the absolute, there's going to be a lot of circular logic, which by many scientists and there's many people who consider circular logic to be invalid, right? However, I'd argue that at the absolute level, circular logic is the only logic which is self-consistent and accurate. There's no other logic that there could be other than circular logic. And I would say that circular logic is actually the highest logic and the most accurate. Okay. And I can explain that a bit more as I continue. So who? The self. What? I'd say the truth or the absolute truth. So when I say the truth or the absolute truth, essentially the truth is simply what is the case, right? Whatever is the case, it doesn't matter what it is, that's what the truth is, right? And when I say the absolute truth, I'm essentially speaking about the truth that has no opposite. So usually when we think in dualities, for example, hot and cold, up and down, left and right, we would also think of truth as having the opposition of falsehood. But that's only true in a relative sense. So within the relative and dualistic plane, yes, there are things which are true and false, but I'd say that at the absolute level, there is no opposite to truth. Because even for something which we would refer to as being false, it must be true that it's false for it to be false. Do you see that? This is one of my videos which got the most views, why it's impossible to truly think that you are wrong. Which, yeah. I was essentially explaining this logic where you realize that essentially one of my favorite analogies is that two pluses, a positive and a positive equals a positive, but a negative and a negative also equals a positive. A negative and a negative doesn't equal a negative because both negatives cancel each other out, resulting in a positive again, you see? So truth is in a sense a positive and falsehood is in a sense a negative. So if you was to say, let's say I'm saying it's a false statement that I am recording this video. It's a false statement that I'm recording this video, right? So if it's true that that statement was a false statement, I am recording this video. If that's true, that what I just said, that statement is false, do you see the paradox of that? Do you see the paradox? See, because it leads to an infinite regress. It leads to an infinite recurrence. And this is essentially what's captured by that paradox. This statement is false. Because if it's true that the statement is false, then the statement is true, which means that it's false, which means that it's true, which means that it's false, which means that it's true, so on and so forth. See, so this is kind of a way which shows the limitation of trying to capture reality in any kind of dualistic or relative system, which is what our mind does, which is all that our mind is capable of, because our mind has been created within duality, right? Our mind can only understand things in contrast to other things, which I explained earlier, right? So essentially, something cannot be absolutely false. That's what I'm saying. Something can be absolutely true, but something cannot be absolutely false. Because if something is absolutely false, essentially what you're saying is that it's false, which means that it must be true, you see? And then if you say it's true that it's false, then it's true. See, so for something to be false, it has to also be true, you see? But something can be true. It can be true that something is true without there being anything false about it. Do you see? See, this is why truth trumps falsehood. And that's why there is such a thing as absolute truth with no opposite. And there's no such thing as absolute falsehood. See, and that's the core of reality. That's really what reality is. It's just absolute truth. And what that is, see, it has no part. When I'm saying something's absolutely true, we usually use truth almost as a description. Like, for example, it's true that this thing is big, or it's true that that thing exists, or it's true that Trump won the election, or describing something in particular, right? But what I'm speaking about, the absolute truth, see, that's all relative truth, which may or may not be true depending on the conditions. But the absolute truth is unconditional. It doesn't matter about what the conditions of the relative plane are. The absolute truth will always be absolutely true. It always has been, it always will be, and it is now, right? Because it has no particular qualities. The only quality it has about it is that it's true, you see. And that's really the core of what people would call reality or existence, is simply that the truth is being true, right? And that's what makes reality real. So that answers the question of what. So we've covered who, we've covered what, where. For where, I've written here / everywhere. See, because really and truly, here and there are ultimately the same thing, because what's here to me is there to you. And what's here for you is over there for me. See, so here and there is only a matter of perspective. All right. Do you see that? It's just purely relative and just a matter of perspective. There's no such thing as like absolutely over here or over there. And because the nature of experience is always a first person perspective, it's always a first person point of view, reality can only ever be experienced as here. That's why I use here rather than there. And that's why I also say everywhere, because everywhere is here. That's what you have to understand, is that space, in a sense, is uniform, right? So when, for this I've written now / eternity. As I said, the absolute truth transcends time and space, because time and space also only exists within duality and opposition. Because, for example, space is defined by the opposition against no space, right? You can only understand what space is because you've experienced the lack of space, right? You can only understand time by how can I explain this? Time is a bit more trickier because it feels like time is constant, right? Um, but you've experienced states of consciousness where you wasn't really experiencing any time within deep sleep. So you have the contrast against that, where you're in a sense in a timeless state. You only really experience time in a wakeful state, and you've experienced many different amounts of time. So you've experienced short lengths of time and long lengths of time. So through the contrast between these different experiences, you can understand what time is, in a sense. But both of these things, time and space, they can only exist within duality, right? They are secondary, not primary. So since the absolute truth or the self, and what really links the absolute truth and the self, really and truly they're the same thing, really. It's just that, as I said, with the circular logic, because the truth is true, that's the same as saying that the truth is itself. And that's essentially the self. The self is just that circular logic loop. It's just the loop of the truth being itself. And the truth being itself is essentially what the self is, because the self is itself. See, so that's kind of what unifies the truth and the self. One second. So yeah, who, the self, what, the truth, where, here / everywhere, when, now / eternity, why. Okay, so this where well, there's different reasons for why as well. As I said, for all these questions, really, the most accurate answer is nothing in particular, but the mind won't be satisfied with that. So I'm gonna try and answer these a bit more satisfying answers for the mind, although they may be a little bit less accurate. But why? I'd say partially for entertainment, right? There's no entertainment at the absolute level because there's no forms, because there's no time, there's no contrast, there's not anything. So there can't really be enjoyment or entertainment or exploration. So that's one of the reasons. I'd also say it's to realize / understand / observe / experience itself. So the truth or the self wants to realize or understand or observe / experience itself, which it can't do in an absolute non-dual state. It can only do that within a dualistic state, which is why we've, in a sense, incarnated to have these experiences. And how? Here I've written the most. It's not all about how, it also explains all the rest of the questions, but this is where I really explain everything. So I'll kind of read what I've written. So how did this occur? Via pure and sheer will. See, since the self is absolute, there are no others. See, since the self is absolute, it's also infinite, right? The reasons why everything is limited, like within incarnation, within the dualistic plane, as I said, for example, this mug is limited. Everything that exists is limited because it's limited by its own qualities and its own nature. See, so this can't be, like, this can only be what it is by not being everything else. So therefore it's limited. A cup can't see. A cup can't hear. A cup can't make a YouTube video, right? But I'm a human. I can make a video. I can see, I can hear. but I can't hold boiling tea or coffee like a mug can, right? Like I can't turn on a TV like a remote controller can, right? I can turn it on using a remote controller, but without a remote controller, I can't turn on the TV. See, every single thing can do something that another thing can't, right? So essentially, what we're able to do also limits what we aren't able to do, because it is defined by our particular qualities. So everything is limited, right? And everything is, in a sense, limited by everything else. Everything else limits everything else, you see. So, for example, I'm a human and I'm limited by the law. And some people could argue that, but like let's just say I'm limited by the laws of like the country that I live in. See, that's other humans and other institutions and so on which limit me. I'm also limited by the laws of nature. See, nature is other than me in reference to a human. See, so nature can limit me. Time, space, gravity, all of these things can limit me. But since the self is absolute, there's nothing other than the self to limit it. And it also has no particular qualities of its own. Therefore, it's unlimited and infinite. So whatever it wants happens. That's why I described how is via sheer will. It's God's will, in a sense, which is described by many religions through God's grace, or inshallah, if God wills it, etc., etc. So how? This is just the tip of the iceberg. Pure will accompanied with a lack of limitation or any finite nature. And this essentially allows for the capacity of consciousness, right? And the capacity of consciousness is essentially the ability to self-reflect. That's essentially all that consciousness is. Consciousness is simply a self-reflection or a self-communication device. That's how I describe what consciousness is, right? And via consciousness, as I said, the absolute self is absolute, and there's nothing other than it. So it's completely uniform, meaning it's formless. It's completely uniform, and essentially this is what yoga means, is union. And even in Christianity, there's the Holy Communion, etc., etc. It's essentially a unification of all divisions, of all polarities, of all oppositions and all dualities into non-duality at the 0 point. That's what that's referring to. So it's uniform at its absolute highest state. So any divisions or partitions must be imagined by the self. They're not actually divided. The self is not actually divided into many parts, but it can imagine that there are divisions and partitions. As I said, because it's unlimited, it has no limitations on it, so it can imagine anything, right? So using its infinite will, its infinite imagination, its unlimited nature, it can imagine it can accurately imagine divisions or partitions within itself. So think of the self as almost like a whole, just circle, and it can imagine divisions within itself, like multiple divisions of all the dualities, right? So let me just plug my laptop in. Okay, 1 second. So imagine divisions / partitions within the self allow for sections of the self to be perceived from a particular point of view for a particular amount of time. due to the contrast against everything else, which is not being perceived at that moment. See, so what all perception is, anytime you're having a perception or experience, like right now, you're watching this video, what defines this experience, creates this very experience, you watching this video, is it's also essentially being created by everything that you're not perceiving right now. See, so you're watching this video, which means there's a million other videos that you're not watching. That means there's a million other things that you're not doing. See, as I said before, you can only be doing one thing at a time. There's only one of everything that exists, right? There's only ever one moment in time. So you can only ever be doing one thing at a time. And you can only be having one experience at a time. So essentially, what you're experiencing is being defined also simultaneously. It's being co-defined by what you're not experiencing. Okay? So imagine divisions or partitions within the self allow for sections of the self to be perceived from a particular point of view for a particular amount of time, due to the contrast against everything else which is not being perceived at that moment. In this way, the self can analyze itself through being conscious of each frame of consciousness. So you could imagine each singular moment where you're having an experience, you can almost imagine that as a frame of consciousness. Same way like in a film, like a 2-hour film of fluid video. See, when you're experiencing your life, it feels fluid. It doesn't feel like it's being chopped up in frames, right? So when you're watching a film, it's fluid frames, just one frame after the other happening in succession at such a fast rate that you don't perceive the individual frames. But it really is there's just light being projected through the projector, and it's just literally just putting one frame after the other in front of the projector. And see, that light, that white light, in a sense, just represents just pure consciousness, being only conscious of itself, consciousness being conscious of consciousness. But it's not really being conscious of anything in particular until you essentially shine it through the prism of these frames, essentially, and that's your mind. Every human, see, we have this, when I said the absolute self, that I is universal. My I, your I, everyone that you know, that I is the same I. It's the universal I, right? Even consciousness, there's only one consciousness. So that consciousness that is being conscious right now is universal. Your consciousness, and my consciousness, consciousness cannot be had by any individual, right? So consciousness, that's universal for everyone. However, every individual has their own unique mind. So my mind is not the same as your mind. That's why I'd say it's not the same. And the mind is, in a sense, like the prism that the light is shining through, which refracts it into a particular image. And that image that you're seeing is different to the image that I'm seeing. That's why everyone has a unique experience, even though we're experiencing the same reality, right? Because we're all seeing it from different angles, and every angle that the light is being refracted through creates a unique and different image. So in a sense, the self or reality is looking at itself. This is why I said the self-reflection, because in the mirror, right? This is why a mirror is such a perfect analogy for consciousness, because in the mirror, you're just seeing a reflection of yourself, right? You're just seeing a reflection of yourself. You're seeing yourself by seeing the light just being bounced back off the mirror and back to yourself. So this is, in a sense, how the self is realizing and coming to know itself and understanding itself, because it already was itself at the beginning. As I said, this is outside of time, but it already was itself, but it wasn't conscious of itself. It it wasn't able to experience itself or understand itself because there was no contrast. There was nothing else other than the self. So you think of it just like this. Imagine there was God, right? At the beginning of time. As I said, this is outside of time, but we just need to anthropomorphize it just for your mind to be able to understand it. Because as I said, the mind can only understand in opposites. So let's just say God was there at the beginning of time. It was all powerful, all knowing, but it hadn't. There was nothing other than God because it was everything, right? It was omnipresent, etc. It was everything. So how could God know itself if there wasn't anything other than God, right? So in a sense, it created everything opposite to it, which created the fool. It created the devil. It created everything opposite to it, in a sense, to be able to incarnate and experience everything that it isn't, and use that experience to contrast against its original nature, and able to grasp its actual own nature. As I said, it always was itself, but it didn't always understand itself. However, through this process of incarnation, consciousness, self-reflection, and experience, it's able to then begin to understand itself. So let me continue. So yeah, in this way, the self can analyze itself through being conscious of each frame of consciousness one at a time in succession, giving the illusion of time. This creates what appears to be an experience. So this is what creates the appearance of an experience, right? When in actuality, it is most accurate to describe that nobody in particular is experiencing anything at all in particular at any given moment. And that's why impermanence is at the core of this dualistic plane. That's why change is the only constant. That's even why it feels like there is time, because reality is always shape-shifting onto the next form, because it's infinite, so it has infinite forms. Because it has no particular form, it has infinite forms that it could be. It has infinite potentiality, and it's always like going onto the next, onto the next, onto the next. Even though it's not happening through time, it's just unfolding within the same place, here and now. But because it can only experience one at a time, it within succession, it gives that appearance of it gives that illusion of time, and it gives that illusion of experience. And every experience, as I said, can only be had from what seems to be a first person point of view. And that's what creates that illusion of the ego, that creates the illusion that there is really someone, an individual here, an individual human which is having its own experience, when actually there's no individual and there's no particular experience that this individual is having, because the experience is changing every millisecond. Before you even register what you're experiencing, you're already experiencing something else. And that's where constants come in, or anchors, which I'll just explain briefly. For example, all humans and so on, their ego or psychological structure is held together through these constants or anchors. For example, your name, or your environment, etc., etc. See, even all these 5 questions: who, what, when, where, why, how. These are, in a sense, every individual or false ego has these false anchors. For example, what, you would think that, what, a human. Why? Because I was born, because my parents had sex and created me. Like how, yeah, through the process of birth, etc. Like what, and my name, and so on and so forth. So essentially, these anchors are seemingly constant throughout the flux of change. Even though everything is changing, every single moment reality is changing, and what reality is now is different from what it was 5 seconds ago. But those seeming constants give the illusion to the ego of continuation and self-perpetuation. It gives the illusion that there is an individual particular self here that is going through time and having these experiences, when in fact that's actually an illusion, right? Because there's no particular experience that's being had, and that's why it's always changing. And there's no one in particular experiencing anything. That's why I'm having an experience, you are, and that dog and that cat and every single thing there is having an experience. So there's no one in particular having an experience. There's no particular experience to have, and there's no particular method of how it's occurring or why it's occurring. So let me continue. And here I wrote, particularity versus generality is important, since the self is conscious of its whole self at all times. However, the absolute self is synonymous with no self due to its lack of any particular qualities, meaning it cannot be perceived. Or in other words, perceiving it wholly, if you was to perceive the whole absolute truth or the whole absolute self all at once, it would be completely equivalent to having no experience at all. It would be completely equivalent to the lack of experience. Because, as I said, all your experiences are in a sense asymmetries, where you're experiencing one thing and you're only experiencing that because you're not experiencing something else. But if you was to experience everything all at once, every positive and negative, every up and down, every left and right, every righteousness and corruption, they would all, in a sense, cancel out, and there would be no experience at all. So, in a sense, absolute consciousness is synonymous with unconsciousness, because consciousness is conscious of itself, but there's nothing in particular to be conscious of. So everything cancels itself out. So the self at the beginning of time, let's say, it was already conscious of everything, but it wasn't having an experience because it didn't really exist. Existence is standing out. You see, uniqueness. But because it was completely general, completely uniform, there was nothing to experience. Right? So, yeah, I know I'm probably repeating myself, but I have to repeat it so that the point kind of settles in and you understand it. So yeah, due to the lack of any particular qualities, meaning it cannot be perceived, or in other words, perceiving it wholly would be equivalent to the complete lack of experience. As a result, in order to for the appearance of any experience or existence to occur, particularity and uniqueness is paramount, since that is the very fabric of existence. That's what I was explaining earlier on in the video, is that when for example, you say I exist, or this video exists, you're essentially, all you're saying is that this video stands out from all the other videos, because there's no other video like this one. And I'm not saying that there's anything special about this video. It's the same for any single video that exists. It's the same for any picture that exists. Every single picture is unique. There's you can say there's copies, but every single copy is also going to have a different quality. There may be a very small difference, or it may be appearing on a different phone, or you may be showing the copy of the image somewhere else within time and space. So you can't really have copies of things. There's no real such thing as a copy of anything. Every single thing is unique. That's all that existence is. It means to stand out from the background. That's all it means. And it can only stand out by being unique. You see? For example, if there was 100 people standing in a room and they was all wearing black, but then there was one person wearing white, they would be standing out through the contrast against everyone else. And then you would almost, and that's the same as saying they exist. The person wearing white exists. And the moment that there's a person in white, Like if they were all wearing white, then there would be no existence in this analogy, because they're all wearing white, so there's no contrast. But then the moment there's one person wearing black, that person in black exists because it stands out, and simultaneously it would make everyone in white exist because the white would stand out against that one black now, you see. So it's just the only thing that existence is the contrast between two unique objects. That's literally it. And of course the underlying truth that is true. See, because if there was no truth that was being true, or the absolute, then we couldn't even be speaking about anything anyway. So one can only ever experience something in particular. One can never experience a generality. Have you noticed this? You can never experience a generality, since experience is first hand, and generality would be the sum of all individual experiences. So generality is always more just a concept. Like, you can create averages and so on and so forth, but you've never experienced an average. You can only experience one individual case at a time, and then you could get your experience and someone else's experience and their experience and their experience, and then you could create a general rule. But no individual experience the generality, you see. You can't experience a generality. You can only experience something in specific, right? Yes. And the generality, in a sense, would be the sum of all individual experiences, which we could label as the collective consciousness. But nobody experiences the collective consciousness, you see. No individual experiences the collective consciousness. They only experience their own consciousness, but the collective is, in a sense, the sum or aggregate of all individual experiences. And for this, division, opposites, polarity, and distinctions are necessary. And this is why samadhi, which is a term within yoga, which is referred to almost as the highest level of meditation, or in a sense the holy grail of yoga. Essentially what this is, yes, this is why samadhi, which is referred to as the holy grail or mastery of yoga / enlightenment, is completely equanimous intellect. That's what samadhi is equanimous intellect. And this is, in a sense, referring to complete balance and calibration of consciousness, where consciousness is completely calibrated to the 0 point. And the 0 point is, in a sense, not a metaphor, but it is the absolute truth, the 0 point. See, everything that you experience is within dimensions, and we would say that the human experience is within the third dimension, and there's the second dimension, the first dimension, the fourth, and so on and so forth, right? But all of those dimensions arise and are projected out of the 0 dimension. And that 0 point, which I'm speaking about, is the 0 dimension, which everything, that is essentially the core of reality, is the 0 dimension. Essentially, is everything all in one point. That's what it is. And if you believe in the Big Bang and so on, the Big Bang would have essentially exploded from the 0 point, even though that's not really it's not like a point in geographical space, because every single point within space is the 0 point. That's what you have to understand, is that it's a uniform field. And maybe I can put in with the editing, I'll put in a little image or video to help you kind of visualize it or understand what I'm speaking about when I speak about the unified field. But yeah, see, so the first dimension, second dimension, third dimension, they all come out of the 0 dimension, and that's the 0 point. And it's completely symmetrical, completely uniform and formless, right? So samadhi is complete balance. See, as I said, all forms are created out of imbalances or asymmetries, right? And the formless or the uniform is completely symmetrical and balanced, and is completely calibrated to the 0 point, right? So it's hard to describe through words. It's really something that has to be experienced firsthand. But yeah, so referring to complete balance and calibration of consciousness to the 0 point. This is since the intellect, or what is referred to as buddhi in yoga. Buddhi is just the intellect. That is the discriminatory mind, or the dualistic mind. And this is the essence of the ego, or what everyone believes themselves to be. When everyone says, oh, like I did this and so on and so forth, the I that they're referring to, unknowingly, unconsciously, they're referring to the absolute self. But consciously, what they believe themselves to be is that ego. They won't call it the ego. They'll just say it's me. Like the human, blah, blah, blah. But that's actually that psychological self, which is just the discriminatory mind. Right? And for the ego to be operating, it can't be in samadhi. It can't be completely balanced and calibrated, because then it would have no form and it would have no existence. So to stand out and have an existence, it has to be in asymmetrical form and experiencing something in particular through discrimination and through discernment between two different objects and two different polarities and the contrast between two different things. See, that's what I've been explaining this whole video. So what is referred to as buddhi in yoga is the discriminatory mind, or the essence of the ego, which can only perceive by noticing distinctions and contrasts between two or more objects. At the 0 point, there is complete non-duality and unification of all perspectives, allowing for no perception, experience, or consciousness, due to a lack of an opposite to reflect or contrast against, therefore making self-realization impossible. Ultimately, one must fall to rise. One must become selectively conscious of aspects of the self, which is essentially just incarnating and existing and experiencing life. So one must become selectively conscious of aspects and partitions of the self, whilst forgetting the rest, in order to perceive the contrast from the absolute, all unifying and all nullifying perspective, in order to simultaneously grasp both in one swift and eternal insight. And that's essentially what self-realization is. It's a swift and eternal insight where one grasps simultaneously the absolute and relative nature of reality all at once. And that can only be possible if one has experienced the absolute state of reality and the relative state of reality. And of course, there is no relative state. The relative state is imagined by the absolute state. And that's why it's referred to as Maya, or an illusion, or samsara, etc. And what Maya is, or illusion, all that is essentially, it's an appearance. And appearances, the common person, they take things, they take appearances to be what they appear to be. See, like this mug appears to be a mug. It appears to be a mug, so they would say it's a mug. But this appearance of a mug isn't actually a mug. What it is it's just an appearance. That's it. See, so all appearances appear. That's their nature. But appearances don't have any quality in particular, as I said, which I've said 1,000 times in this video now. And that's why there's a million appearances. And the appearances are always shape-shifting. Right? But one can only have this self-realization through having incarnated, experienced this Maya, which is just an appearance of a life, of an existence which isn't actually a life. There's not actually anything, like there's not actually any such thing as existence or life. See, as I said, because life is just in contrast to death, right? But one can only have this realization once one has incarnated, experienced everything that you're not, in quotation marks, because the self is actually absolute. And only once you've experienced what you're not and realize that appearance of an experience to be an illusion, once you realize that your whole life and your whole experience is just an illusion, is just an appearance of a life, is just an appearance of existence, is just an appearance, but it's not actually life, it's not actually existence, it's just an illusion which was created through the imagined partitions within the self. Once you realize that, all the imagined partitions will collapse simultaneously, everything will collapse in on itself, leaving only the absolute truth. And you will have returned back to the self, in a sense. Even though you always were the self, but from your direct experience, so to speak, from your point of consciousness, one will have completed the cycle. And you will never have to do the cycle of reincarnation and so on, if you believe in that. So yeah, I know I repeated myself a lot, but that's something that you should realize, is that the absolute truth is completely self-consistent. That's what I'm saying. That's why circular logic is the only logic that could be true at the highest level. I mean, what could something be other than itself? What could black be other than black? What could life be other than alive? What could existence be other than existence? What could reality be other than real? See, all of these new age things, saying things like reality is an illusion and so on and so forth. I understand what they're saying, but it's not completely accurate. Reality is real, and you can't deny that. Illusions are illusory, and imagination is imaginary. And that's what you have to realize what reality actually is. But taking the appearances or the imaginations or the illusions to be reality, that's false. So in that sense, those statements are correct. But when you realize reality itself is real, but reality has no particular qualities, then that's when you'll have been realized. So that was my best attempt. I'm not sure how well I explained it, but I hope it helps someone. Mostly these videos are also to help myself process through things. I haven't really been making as many videos recently because I feel like I've just covered most of the topics I wanted to. But this kind of format of video came to me last night. I couldn't sleep, and I just kind of wrote it out in my notes, and just recorded it. So yeah, if you guys have any topics in specific, maybe just more down to earth topics that you'd like me to cover or anything like that, then just write in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, then hit the like button. If you're new and you enjoyed, hit subscribe and check out my other videos. There's many other videos like this. And have a nice day.